Could an agreement to bring an end to the Russian invasion of Ukraine be on the horizon? Today, Russia announced its military will scale back operations near Ukraine's capital of Kyiv as a gesture of goodwill. Meanwhile, President Biden's back on American soil attempted to explain his recent gaffes in Europe by somehow, just saying we didn't see what we saw. Friends, it's time for Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. So we want this war to end as soon as possible. I think all of us agree on that much. The suffering is horrific. The situation is awful. And the Russians are the aggressors here. But first and foremost, what we need to have is an end to the conflict in the most expeditious way we can achieve it. And so that means negotiations are certainly a part of the equation. No one trusts Vladimir Putin. We know that much. Everyone knows he's a liar. Everyone knows that he is both cunning and ruthless, but he's also the individual who could bring this war to a screeching halt tomorrow if he chose to do so. Speaking to him is therefore a necessity, and having a real peace agreement in place would benefit everybody in the region right now, at least in the immediate term. We can figure out the rest later. So there is a proposed peace framework from the Ukrainian delegation. Here's what it's got. A neutral and non-nuclear status for Ukraine, so they will not join NATO and they will not host in Ukraine foreign military, so it won't become a place where you have a lot of bases like our NATO allies, for example, do. The European Union, accession rather to the European Union is one of the points here. Talks over the future of the Crimean Peninsula over the next 15 years. And then security guarantees by third party nations that may include the UK, US, Turkey, China, Russia, Germany, Canada, Italy, Poland, and Israel. So the idea here would be Ukraine is Ukraine, not a forward operating base for any other entities, alliances, or countries, not going to have its own nukes, obviously, not going to be in a position to become a regional military power, but it would be an independent country. What about the status of the Donbas region, of course, in all this? Right now, Crimea, it seems, is definitely going to be a part of the Russian Federation at the end of this conflict. It already has been treated as a de facto part of the Russian Federation, now stretching back 40 years. So there's the possibility of negotiation. Is this going to likely end the conflict in a matter of days? Highly unlikely. As much as that would be better for humanity, it doesn't look like that is going to happen, but at least there are talks underway, and there could be some end to the conflict in sight weeks instead of months out. The situation for the Russian forces around Kyiv, for example, seems to suggest that they have been blocked from a full-on advance to swarm or at least cut off entirely the capital. So that goes to the will and capability of the Ukrainian defenders up to this point, who have exceeded expectations both in their ability and desire to fight back against the Russian invaders. So there is some optimism in this equation of general misery, destruction, and despair in Ukraine. It's the midst of a terrible war. But the Ukrainian people are fighting. They are fighting valiantly. The Russians are slowed down as a result. There are negotiations underway. And hopefully, at some point soon on the show, we'll be able to say that there is a ceasefire and a lasting, durable peace that will be achieved thereafter. Hopefully. Nobody knows until it's done and the bullets and bombs stop flying, though. There's a lot that can change here on the battlefield. There are a lot of dynamics that are in constant flux. Meanwhile, back here at home, Joe Biden, who we were told, as you remember, when we voted, and not me, but when the American people were voting back in 2020 and decided, those who decided to vote for Biden, part of it was they believed that he was a foreign policy steady hand, that he would make things on the world stage calmer and better. And yet what we've seen is a guy who blunders, fumbles, and bumbles all over the place. His bluster plays not well at all in the foreign policy arena when there are nukes in the background. And so he's had to have a number of walkbacks. A walkback, for example, on responding, quote, in kind to a Russian chemical weapons attack in Ukraine. Well, that suggested to a lot of people chemical weapons being used by the U.S., which would be a huge, huge issue, huge problem. The biggest of all, he said something about U.S. troops seeing Ukrainian civilians with his own eyes in the streets, and I think that was just, people were taking that one in an ultra literal sense. When and I think that was a little more clear what he meant than he got credit for, perhaps. But on the regime change issue, which he definitely said as clear as anybody could ever say it, this man cannot be left in power about Vladimir Putin. That was a really bad one. So he had his whole staff walk that back. What was amazing today, bring you up to speed to where we are right now, is that Biden, when he's pressed on this stuff, says there are no walkbacks. You didn't see or hear what you thought you heard or said, or I heard you say, or whatever. You get it. Biden saying it hasn't been walked back. Play it.
Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know...
None of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
None of the three occurred, except they all occurred, and we all saw it, we all heard it, and there's a reason why his staff has spent days now doing damage control. That's what we call it when people say, oh, no, he didn't mean that. He didn't really say that. He said some other thing. And then there was Biden trying here to explain this man cannot stay in power, the most damaging and concerning line of the three that got him in a tight spot. Here he's trying to explain his way out of that one. Watch.
So if saying he cannot remain in power does not mean regime change, what does it mean in your opinion?
It means that I would hope it was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
What made you add that? Because that wasn't in your prepared remarks, we were told. So what made you add that at the end, Mr. President? Because
I was talking to the Russian people. The last part of the speech was talking to the Russian people, telling them what we thought. And I was communicating this to not only the Russian people, but the whole world. This is just stating a simple fact that this kind of behavior is totally unacceptable.
This kind of behavior is unacceptable. He means, of course, what Vladimir Putin's doing, but a lot of people would say Joe Biden, in his role in this situation as a non-belligerent, the U.S. is a non-belligerent in the conflict, should not be saying things while there's an active negotiation underway with the Russian Federation about regime change in Russia. We've seen how regime change works out when we try it in this country a number of times over the last 20 years. It's not good. Not something we want to give a shot to again. And certainly when you have thousands of nuclear weapons that hang in the balance, that's concerning. And then there was this moment where Biden also tried to clarify his statement to the U.S. troops. And listen to what he said. Play it.
I was talking to the troops. We were talking about helping train the troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. That's what the context. I sat there with those guys for a couple hours. That's what we talked about.
So when you said you're going to see when you're there, you were not intending to
I was referring to meeting with and talking with the Ukrainian troops that were in Poland.
Ukrainian troops that are in Poland? So is he saying there are U.S. troops training Ukrainians in Poland? Because that would be newsworthy and maybe not something that he actually wants to tell everybody in the world, but that seems to be where we are. Look, we'll get into more of the battlefield update, the whole situation here, coming up in a moment with Dakota Wood of the Heritage Foundation. We'll be talking to him about what the negotiations look like and all the rest of it. But first, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and cybersecurity application tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure is using proprietary encryption and offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communications based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue. Without real security, people can read your emails, messages, even your bank information. Secure will never mine your data and never asks for your phone number. You can send emails to your doctor, banker, lawyer, or anyone else with total confidence that you're not being spied on by your internet provider or big tech. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. It costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com and use promo code BUCK for 25% off. We'll be right back with more Hold the Line. We may be inching closer to a peace deal in the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, but the Ukrainian government is still signaling it will not compromise when it comes to ceding territory to Russia. Here's what Andrei Yermak, chief of staff to President Zelensky, had to say earlier today.
If a meeting were possible to be held between President Zelensky and President Putin, my question to you, and thus to President Zelensky, is why would you believe anything that Vladimir Putin said?
Sometimes you have to negotiate. The goal is the same. We want to live in the peaceful Ukraine. We want to back our territory. It's our principle. It's our philosophy. We never go for any compromise concerning our independence, concerning our sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Just how far apart are the Ukrainians and Russians when it comes to these negotiations? Here to give insight is Senior Research Fellow at the Defense Programs of the Heritage Foundation, retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood. Dakota, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So first, let's just start with the on-the-ground situation in Ukraine. Moscow announced today they will be scaling back or scaling down military operations near Kyiv. They say it's a gesture of goodwill. But do you think it's cover for failure and essentially a redo, a re-upping in the area? And what's going on here? How big a deal is the announced scale down around the capital?
Yeah, well, they're all lies. I mean, you know, a good faith measure to build trusting relationships while you're bombing and destroying the cities of a country that you've occupied by force. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? So it's really hard to know what their ultimate game is. They're not going to give away any of the territory that they've ceded, or they've seized. So they could be withdrawing these forces to reinsert them in the Donbass region, and again make more aggressive, right? Strengthen this invasion of Ukraine. How is that, confidence building? It could be providing an opening for Belarusian forces to come from north, south toward Kyiv in the replacement of these Russian forces while they're reinforcing other areas. It could be to draw off Ukrainian defensive forces that would then reinforce defensive lines in Donbass. And then once those lines are weakened, they go back into Kyiv, right? So there's no good outcomes to this. And I think it's an opportunity that Putin is taking to reorient his efforts to maximum effect, not to lessen hostilities.
So do you think that the framework for these negotiations, I mean, is there progress being made here? I mean, the proposal by Ukraine up at this point, is it something that Putin may cede to? What do you think? I mean, where does that aspect, because I think everyone's assumption right now, Dakota, at least when I say everybody, the consensus seems to be at some point Putin's going to say, okay, let's make a deal. Are they anywhere in the neighborhood of what could be a real deal that would stop the war?
No, in the giant Venn diagram, the overlap of interests, it seems to be irreconcilable at the moment, right? So Putin is wanting, a Ukraine that is a supplicant, that's a vassal state. He wants them to give up Crimea. He wants to give up the Donbass region, to declare the sovereignty of these breakaway republics and all that. Ukraine's not going to do that. Ukraine has repeatedly asked for humanitarian corridors. Russia has tentatively said yes to this, and then they go ahead and they bomb Mariupol and kill more civilians along the way. Ukraine is wanting some kind of security guarantees, like you would find in Article 5 of the NATO treaty, such that Germany and the United States and France and others would guarantee to ride to Ukraine's rescue if anything untoward, if they were invaded again or something along those lines. And then, so I just don't see where Putin's strategic objectives overlap in any way with Ukraine's interests. And I think that these negotiations, while they have to continue, I mean, you have to be able to talk to each other. I don't think they're going to bear fruit anytime in the near future.
And then on the military reality here, at this point, given what we've seen, I mean, there's very high casualty figures that are being put out from numerous sources on the Russian side. Obviously, there are Ukrainian cities that parts of them look like something you would have expected after the bombings in World War II on the Western Front. So there's clearly been a lot of high intensity conflict here. Do you think that the Russian losses, though, are at a level where they are fundamentally changing Putin's calculus for what is achievable here, or is it just going more slowly and with higher cost than Putin anticipated, but the end goal in his mind remains the same?
I think it's the latter part. I think you stated that well. I mean, active duty Russian army is about 280,000 troops, just shy of 300. If you add in airborne and special forces, they maybe have 400,000, and then another 500,000 in terms of conscripts and reserves. So he's still got force that he can throw into the meat grinder. 200,000 plus is already committed. So of his active forces, over half have already been there. He can't forget Syria. He can't forget the Russian Far East. You can't forget other areas where Russia has interests. So this has really taken a toll on usable combat power, especially in the precision-guided munitions realm, right? So we're seeing more artillery barrages and use of dun bombs. But there's things that he hasn't thrown into the mix yet. We haven't seen a massive cyber assault. We haven't seen the use of large-scale, bombers, the old conventional bombers that could just lay waste to some of these cities. So he's holding back some of his kit. We don't know why that's the case, right? But I think the longer this drags on, the more political cost to Vladimir Putin and economic cost to the country, it's likely to get much, much worse before we see any let up in his invasion of Ukraine.
And on the U.S. side of this, Dakota, I think everybody, even including some honest Democrats I've seen, have suggested it would be helpful if the commander-in-chief wouldn't say things that have to be immediately walked back by his staff. That would be a good start. But on the actual, let's say on the action front here, diplomacy, provision of weapons, training, all of that non-direct military intervention, but still on the menu of options of things the U.S. can and is doing. What do you think needs to happen here? I mean, if you were talking to Biden right now and trying to advise him on what the U.S. Degree of involvement, and let's say over the next 30 days, what should we see from the U.S. and NATO side?
Well, you look at where Russia is actually able to cause harm. Their pilots aren't doing well, but they do outnumber Ukrainian aircraft and pilots. They do have naval forces in the Black Sea, and so we should be increasing the number of anti-platform munitions, which help level the playing field for the Ukrainians. They're desperate in need of medical supplies, just regular ammunition for, multiple calibers. And so that's sustained flow of munitions. We have to keep that up, because if they start running out, then the Ukrainians are going to be on the short end, and they won't have any other option but to surrender, right, to Vladimir Putin. And that won't be good for Europe or NATO, the United States. So we need to not just sustain what we're doing, but increase those amounts that we're currently providing Ukraine, and double, triple down on these sanctions to try to isolate Russia from the global economy.
Dakota, always appreciate the perspective. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The Biden administration is laying out its proposed budget for 2023. And not surprisingly, it includes trillions of dollars in new taxes. We'll take a look at some of the details with our friend, CEO of American Majority, Ned Ryun, when we come back.
The budget I'm releasing today sends a clear message to the American people that what we value. First, fiscal responsibility. Second, safety and security. And thirdly, the investments needed to build a better America. It makes prudent investments in economic growth and more equitable economy, while making sure corporations and the very wealthy pay their fair share.
President Biden calling for the largest tax hike in history, an additional $2.5 trillion to pay for his massive $5.8 trillion spending plan. The new proposal, outlined Monday, includes a 20% minimum tax on corporations and wealthy Americans whose income is $100 million or more. The president says this plan will, quote, reduce Trump's deficit and return the fiscal house to order. but a lot of folks disagree, of course. Here with the reaction, CEO of American Majority, Ned Ryun. Man, Ned, he knows what's up. Ned, good to see you.
Good to be back with you, Buck.
So putting Biden in charge of tackling the debt and the deficit is like asking the arsonist to be the chief firefighter, I feel like. But let's take a look at what we've got here. Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget, a $31 billion increase in defense spending, cut the cost of healthcare, childcare, $30 billion in police resources, $3.2 billion for state and local spending, and a whole lot of other stuff. I think like $15 billion, give or take a few billion, for climate change research, et cetera, et cetera. What do you make of this, Ned?
Well, I mean, this bill really encapsulates what I described the Biden administration as a whole, that it's a collision of bad monetary policy and bad energy policy. And this bill really captures all of those things. My first thought was, Buck, why not make it 10 trillion? Why not make it 20 trillion? It's already detached from reality. Just put down whatever funny figure you want, because I don't think anybody looking at that actually thinks this is realistic. But back to bad monetary policy, this is going to add, despite his claims that this is fiscally responsible, it's going to add 1.3 trillion at a minimum to our deficit, which last time we did that, they did that the first few months of his administration. It was like pouring jet fuel on inflation. And then you look at some of the other funny stuff that's put in there. They're removing the tax incentives for oil and gas companies. They're adding 11 billion for other nations to be on more efficient, clean fuel. I mean, this is just, it's insane. And the thing that's pretty amazing to me, Buck, when you look at this, they're doubling down on all the bad policies that have led us to this point with inflation, but they're also doubling down on really bad energy policy. And I keep on reminding people, we've already seen empirical evidence for really bad energy policy. Look at Germany. They invested 600 billion over the last 20 some years to end up having to buy the majority of their energy from Russia. And all the money they spent on solar and wind energy has basically left them heavily dependent upon Russia for all of their actual energy needs. This is absolutely insane. And yet they continue to double down. The Biden administration continues to double down on their bad spending policy and their bad energy policy. And nothing good for the American people is going to come of it.
And then, of course, Ned, there's the usual class warfare stuff, always cloaked in a pay their fair share. By the way, Ned, my understanding, Hunter Biden did not pay his fair share, but, you know, he already had to pay $1 million additional because of that. But they're saying it's going to be a billionaire's tax. And here's the Wall Street Journal article breaking down what that actually looks like. The administration, Biden administration, says the tax would apply only to the top 0.1%, meaning hundreds of successful entrepreneurs and small business owners who accumulated wealth over decades through innovation and hard work. But these taxes always start out applying to a few and then spread to millions. I mean, if we want to learn from the history here, Ned, it seems to me like, first of all, they always say it's going to be the billionaires, but the billionaires actually, when you're talking about the trillions that the government wants to spend, billionaires don't have enough money to fund that. No. They need the 150 million Americans who actually pay income tax to be, or the, households that are 50% or so of the country to pay more in income taxes, especially the top 10% of earners overall.
Right.
So that's one aspect of it. So I want you to address that, but then also talk to me about unrealized gains and taxing that, because that's in the proposal.
Well, yeah, but some of that stuff, Buck, Sinema and Manchin, there have been multiple Democratic senators who have said some of these things that are mentioned in the Biden proposal, like these unrealized gains, taxing unrealized gains, and some of these other tax proposals are non-starter for Manchin and Sinema. So to be clear, I don't think this 5.8 trillion plan of Biden's is going to go anywhere. It's up to Congress to decide what's going to be in it. But some of these proposals have already been clearly communicated to the White House by Democratic senators. These are non-starters. But you're right. I mean, they're saying, well, this is tax the wealthy. There's not enough money in the world by these supposed billionaires to actually fund a fraction of a $5.8 trillion plan. But it is really, if you think about it, they're trying to backdoor, as you said, they're backdooring to really get to the bigger tax base, which is middle class America. And again, this is again another front on the war on middle America, on the middle income Americans who pay a lot of the taxes in this country and then are really treated as an afterthought when it comes to actually advancing their priorities. So it's more of the same. And I don't think, of course, we're not going to see this stupidity until we at least take one of the chambers in Congress back, hopefully this fall, maybe both. But you're really not going to see a change on the monetary and energy policy until we take the White House back in 2024.
Feels to me, Ned, like the situation is just turning against the Democrats when you look at the polls. Who do you blame the most for rising inflation, for example? President Biden is at 38% on that one. COVID-19, 28%. Corporations, 23%. Russia's invasion, only 6%. I think those people need either recent history or Econ 101 or a combination thereof, of course. But I mean, look, you also look at the NBC poll, Biden job ratings falling to a new low. 40% of the adults in this poll approve of Biden's performance, 55% disapprove. That's the lowest of his presidency. Ned, how do the Democrats turn this around, at least in advance? Tell me more. Oh, tell me more, Ned. Whisper those sweet nothings about Democrat annihilation, please.
They don't. And I keep reminding people, Buck, that the monetary and energy policy are not bugs. These are features of what they truly believe. And when you look at the poll, the Hill just released a poll showing that inflation is the number one issue for voters. And of course, it's one of the things that voters are focused on that they blame Biden for. Despite their attempts to say this is the Putin price hike and try and blame all of their bad decisions on the last 30 days of what's taking place in Ukraine, the American voters are not buying that. And when you realize that inflation is the number one issue for voters, that this thing that they're proposing, the $5.8 trillion bill that they're proposing, would only increase inflation. Again, go back to they are pouring jet fuel on inflation if this comes to fruition. And it's the number one issue for voters. I mean, they're absolutely detached from reality. And I think they're going to get a rude awakening this fall when reality smacks them in the face. And the American people say, we don't trust you to be able to fix this issue of inflation, which I know we've discussed this, but to remind people, right now, inflation rates are so high, it's essentially people are losing an entire month's worth of their paycheck, and it's not getting better. This is not transitory inflation, Buck. This is going to be long-term, and I think it's going to continue on as long as Biden is in the White House, and it's going to be damaging for them this fall. I mean, you're looking at the generic polls, you're looking at his approval rating, 40% I think is actually high, but again, it's NBC, he's probably in the 30s. You look at the generic polls on top of that, I'd be stunned if it wasn't dozens upon dozens of seats Republicans pick up. I've even said we could see 2010 on steroids where Republicans picked up 63 seats that election. We could see that number maybe even higher if things continue this way.
I certainly hope so. My man, Ned, we're going to be talking to you a lot and hopefully bringing you on for a little victory dance come
I hope so.
Early November. We'll see. Talk to you soon, Ned. Thanks so much, buddy.
Thanks, Buck.
All right, coming up, the Walt Disney Company is once again attacking Ron DeSantis of Florida after the governor signed the Parental Rights in Education bill. The newly woke corporation with its new CEO is vowing to continue to fight for the bill's repeal. We'll talk about that with the First TV's Morgan Zegers in just a moment. But first, we're living in chaotic times. Foreign identity thieves love chaos. American homeowners have become a favorite target for these criminals. And it's not just your credit cards and bank accounts they're after. That's small-time stuff. These hackers want your home. The crime is home title theft. It is exploding in the U.S. And no, you're not covered by homeowners insurance or common identity theft services. The problem is the title to our homes are kept online. An identity thief knows his big payday is as easy as forging your signature stating you sold your home to him. Now he'll take out loan after loan against your home, and you won't know until the collection calls start coming to you, or maybe even an eviction notice. How do you protect yourself? Go to HomeTitleLock.com, friends. HomeTitleLock.com to see if you're already a victim of this crime and don't even know it. This is how you can protect your most valuable asset. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. The First TV's Morgan Zegers comes by in a moment. The Walt Disney Company is not backing down in its fight against Florida's Parental Rights in Education bill, which was signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis just yesterday. The company released a statement that reads, quote, Florida's HB 1557, also known as the Don't Say Gay bill, according to activists, of course, should never have been signed into law. Our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts, and we remain committed to supporting the national and state organizations working to achieve that. We are dedicated to standing up for the rights and safety of LGBTQ plus members of the Disney family, as well as the LGBTQ plus community in Florida and across the country. Joining me now to discuss this bill and much more is contributor here at the First TV, Morgan Zegers. Morgan, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
So here you go. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis knows this. When you are upsetting libs, you're doing it right. And that's something that he's certainly doing here in this situation by signing this bill. What do you make of the left's opposition to 1556, I think is the number, the Parental Rights and Education Bill? Feels like a lot of parents are going to say, why do you want to talk to my 5-year-old about gender identity?
Yeah, Buck, there's a lot of layers to this. I mean, looking at it from the most basic sense, their statement that you just read out, it's like, all right, great. That's actually not what we're talking about here at all. Okay, thanks for the statement, but this is about not sexualizing children between the ages of kindergarten and 3rd grade. And so when you look at it from the political, national issues that we look at these days, the left radicalizes everything. They propagandize everything, and they weren't going to win this conversation because it is about parental rights and protecting children from sexualization. The left can't win any conversation around that. They don't exactly have winning ideas on those concepts. And so they had to change it to the Don't Say Gay bill. Now, if you ask me, I would love to see a conversation where you put people in favor of the bill and opposed to the bill at a table and make them actually talk about what's in the bill. That would completely obliterate the entire leftist messaging on this.
So here is from a Yahoo News article. Disney, or what Disney says, is that they're fighting back against Florida's controversial parental rights and education bill. The law, which will go into effect on July 1st, states that classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. I mean, kindergarten through grade 3, this is about young children not being indoctrinated or even being exposed to things at an age before where I think most parents would want the state, if they ever want the state to engage on these topics. So what's the big deal? Why is this so upsetting to the Democrats? I mean, you saw at the Oscars, you had big celebrities making fun of and really calling out what they say is bigotry in this bill.
Yeah, I mean, this is political grandstanding, Buck. They do it with every issue. If you have read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, they talk about how to have great community organizing on the leftist movement for America. You have to be able to create a population in your movement that can be angry about anything. Every issue is end of world level problems. And so that's why we're going to die in 10 years of climate change, and we're going to kill your grandma if we don't wear a mask. And now the children of the LGBTQ community and their parents are threatened because we aren't teaching kindergartners through 3rd graders that there are different sexualities out there in the world. And so none of it makes sense, but this really just goes into the fact that the more the left actually implements their ideas and talks about them out in the public, the more horrified average Americans become. It was one thing to talk about democratic socialism and to start acting or asking for more fair treatment of gay people or whatever they wanted over the last decade. But now it's reaching a point of radicalism and danger for our children that people are just going to have to put their foot down now. So they really are putting their foots in their mouths every time they talk these days.
What do you think? I mean, the polling seems to suggest that parents are with Governor DeSantis on this, not just in the state of Florida, but more broadly across the country. We're going into a midterm election. I think that it would be good for the American people to see in a whole range of states where different politicians stand on this issue. And so why shouldn't, or do you think they should have Republican majority legislatures in states pass companion bills, what they have in Florida, essentially to say, yeah, we don't want that here either, and see if the left continues this crusade to teach kids who are 5 years old about gender transitions, et cetera.
Yeah, I think people have never really been challenged like this before, but now we're starting to realize that, oh, there's a lot of people out there that believe our children belong to them or belong to the community. And like I just said, parents are horrified to see the actual values of people on the left these days, now that they're becoming much more vocal and confident about things like, oh, yeah, we want to teach your kindergartner about sexuality. That's totally normal for our agenda. It's horrifying people. And so this shouldn't just be done in Florida. It should be done in every conservative conservative state at least with a Republican trifecta, and then we can work on other states as well. But we need to be thinking about getting this intense and going on offense, not only for protecting our kids about sexual curriculum, but also teaching them about the dangers of communism, protecting them from critical race theory, and really going at it when it comes to the radical left, protecting our children. We can't just sit on the sidelines and expect this to end one day just because we've had enough.
Switching gears here, Morgan, the NFL with a decision, a new policy that seems pretty woke. The NFL is going to require all 32 of its professional teams to hire minority offensive assistant coaches for the 2022 season. They announced that every team will be required to hire a minority assistant coach in the offensive staff. The individual can be a minority or a female and be signed to a one-year deal, partially paid from a league-wide fund. I mean, I just wonder, so they're going to mandate this, and then if anybody asks any questions about the qualification of any of these coaches compared to their peers, that will be either sexist or racist or both, right? This is so that they have a mandate which is effectively going to operate almost like a one-person or a one-slot quota, and then if you bring up that that's what's going on, you're a bad person, I guess.
Yeah, this is another example of progressives leading with their actual implementation of their policies into regress. And so we're seeing regressive actions being taken in America. And it's really, really sad because what started with affirmative action in college and has kind of spread throughout other industries in the country is now just turning into straight up hiring people based on their physical features and not based on their merit. I mean, if you do it for the Supreme Court, if you do it for the Vice President of the United States, then yeah, I guess it is going to become more normal to do it for things like an assistant coach on a football team. At the same time, I think it's hilarious that these people think this is an issue that they need to put their time and energy into as we're about to face things like a food shortage because of the Biden regime. And we're putting $100 worth of our money into our gas tanks just to fill up every single week. Things are reaching a breaking point for Americans that can't even get by paycheck to paycheck anymore. And then we have to look on the headlines and see, oh, okay, we're going to bring progress to the world and fight for social justice by hiring minority assistant coaches for the football teams of America. This is wonderful.
Yeah, when you add this to the moment, I think where we're in, where you have the NCAA officially handing the 500-meter freestyle swimming championship to a transgender female. I think that just the everyday American, by a large majority, not just by a simple majority, thinks that kids don't need to be taught gender identity at age 5, think that racially based preferences in hiring are problematic or unethical, and also that letting biological males compete against biological females is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. None of these concepts align with the average American. Now, that being said, over time, they are successful at shifting the Overton window. And part of that is done by teaching children at a young age that these are normal and fair concepts. So that's why it's so important to fight against this curriculum being injected into our schools. And it's not just in our schools, but it's in our colleges. It's in the military now. They're having DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings in many industries across the country. So the more they start to normalize these ideas, that's where we get concerning, because less and less people are going to start to perk their ears up and have concerns with this kind of behavior and this kind of practice in society. So we still have a fighting chance because most people are still on our side. But that's exactly why these trainings are being implemented to shift that.
Morgan, thanks for being with us. Good to see you.
Thanks, Buck.
All right, coming up next, Governor DeSantis laying down the law in Florida as he always does. We'll get into that and more in Quick Hits. Member of the Squad, Congresswoman AOC calls for Clarence Thomas to resign or face impeachment. And comedic actor and leftist Jim Carrey calls Hollywood spineless for giving Will Smith a standing ovation at the Oscars. Oh, wow, look at that. Those stories and more in Quick Hits. Let's get to it. First off, earlier we had Biden kind of suggesting that maybe there were U.S. troops training Ukrainian troops in Poland. That seemed to be the implication of what he said, or what he said, whether he meant it to or not. Today, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, General Todd Wolters, denied that the U.S. is training Ukrainian troops in Poland, just to be clear on this one. And that was, he said this during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Play it.
The president said while he was in Europe that we are training Ukrainian forces in Poland. Is that accurate?
At this time, is that the time setting of the statement?
That's what the president said. Jake Sullivan said we are not. I'm just trying to figure out if we are or are not.
I do not believe that we are in the process of currently training military forces from Ukraine and Poland. There are liaisons that are there that are being given advice, and that's different than I think you're referring to with respect to training.
Interesting. At this time, there was kind of a time sensitivity in the question there. So are we planning to do that? No, it's the kind of stuff that can expand very quickly. And then there's the left-wing outrage about Clarence Thomas's wife having thoughts that she sent in text messages to White House Chief of Staff Meadows back after the 2020 election. AOC thinks that Thomas should be responsible for the naughty text messages of his wife, apparently, that were questioning the election result. You are not allowed to question election results unless it's 2016, Trump wins, and you're going to say it's Russia-Trump collusion like a bunch of lunatics. Clarence Thomas should resign, AOC tweeted. If not, his failure to disclose income from right-wing organizations, recuse himself from matters involving his wife, and his vote to block the January 6th commission from key information must be investigated and could serve as grounds for impeachment. Yes, impeaching a Supreme Court justice because you don't like his wife's text messages to someone that is not that Supreme Court justice. Yeah. Oh, she tweeted also, Congress must understand that a failure to hold Clarence Thomas accountable sends a loud, dangerous signal to the full court, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and the rest, that his acts are fair game. This is a tipping point. Inaction is a decision to erode and further delegitimize SCOTUS. I guess just saying crazy stuff is somehow brand enhancing for libs because they say so much, or write in this case, so much crazy stuff. Jim Carrey is a big lib, by the way. Hasn't done anything funny in like 20 years, but he does think that the Oscar audience was spineless for giving Will Smith after he, in an insane fashion, slapped Chris Rock in the face, and he did slap him, and it was real, folks. Jim Carrey thought the standing ovation the Oscars audience gave wasn't cool at all. Watch this.
What did you think as you watched it unfold, and then what happened after?
I was sickened. I was sickened by the standing ovation. I felt like Hollywood is just spineless, en masse. And it really felt like, oh, this is a really clear indication that we're not the cool club anymore. If we want to yell from the audience and disapprove or show a disapproval or say something on Twitter or whatever, you do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words.
He's right. 100% right. Everything he said was right. And then there's this. Speaking of backbone, Governor Ron DeSantis has quite the backbone, and he stands up for Clarence Thomas while they're calling for him to resign. Watch.
The only thing I will say, Clarence Thomas, greatest living justice and one of the greatest public servants in America.
Indeed. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is next. Shields high.